don't know if you know this about me, but I don't like taking photos or having them taken of me. Like, I'm not opposed to having photos taken of me, but a professional photo shoot of where you have to I remember like the school ones. Now these ones were of course by myself, and you'd have to. Do you remember they position you and okay, you gotta turn that way, or like in the class photos, you'd be standing with your class and they're like, okay, just turn a little bit more, and it's just like, let me get on with my day. And those family photos too, the same thing. Thankfully for the when you go to get a driver's license or a passport photo, it's usually pretty quick. It's like stand in front, don't smile, done. And as long as you don't blink. I am the worst blinker. Almost any time we do a group photo, David, you blinked. Well, I can't just keep my eyes open forever. Well, I particularly remember a family photo shoot that we did in the fall of 2007. I was 15 at the time, and we were having a family photo done, not with just my immediate family, not just my parents and my siblings, but also with my aunts and my cousins, my grandma and grandpa. And it was taking forever. It was taking so long. You just had to get that perfect shot, maybe a few perfect photos, and it just, and you gotta make sure that you have one as much as possible where everybody's not blinking. Speaking of which, I was the only person of my family photoshopped in my younger brother's wedding photos, just to give you an idea of how photogenic I am. But this one, back in the fall of 2007, I was getting frustrated and starting to complain and whine, and it's like, who cares if a picture's not perfect? Life isn't perfect. Like, let pictures just represent life. Like, I don't care, and I just want to get on with my day. And thankfully, it came to an end. And I can't recall whether I got grounded or not, or in trouble based on my comments or how I was acting. But I wouldn't be surprised if somebody was to tell me, somebody in my family, like, oh yeah. But looking back and remembering, yeah, this photo right here. See if you can spot me. Top right, if you didn't know. And just remembering back to that, when that family photo was taken, there's a part of me that wishes that I could go back. That wishes I could grab the remote of life and hit rewind. This is a different remote. One I actually don't use. So, the other one did get home. Thank you, Linda, for encouraging me to put it in Joanna's purse. So, but I wish I could grab the remote of life and press rewind and go back to there and correct my attitude and make that so much better for my family, so much more enjoyable. And the reason I wish I could go back is not necessarily because I got in trouble, because I don't even remember if I did or not. And it's not necessarily to relive that moment, because I wasn't a big fan of taking the pictures. But the reason part of me wishes I could go back was to change my attitude to make it a much more enjoyable experience for everybody else. And because this photo holds a special place in my family, because this is the last professional photo that we have with my grandmother. Because she died less than 6 months from cancer after this photo was taken. And I wish I could go back and just have made that as much of a memorable moment as possible. And I'm sure each one of us could think of moments where we wish we could hit reverse and go back and change something that we said. Each one of us could think of a moment where we could think of that we wish we could go back and change something. You probably have thought something like, I wish I could reverse what I had done. I wish I could go back and change it. I wish I could reverse the outcome. I wish I could reverse the expectations people had on me or the expectations I took upon myself. And we are continuing our talk on control, our series on control, and looking at the life of Abram, later Abraham. And this morning I'm going to use his names interchangeably. And I'm sure that there were moments in Abram's life that he looked at and was like, I wish I could go back and change what I did. And that's one of the things that, if you really look at these heroes of the Bible, if you grew up going to church, you know some names of Moses, Elijah, or Abram, or Abraham, and Samson. You hear these names and you're like, oh yeah, those were great people in the Bible. And if you don't know anything about them, I encourage you to look into their lives. But in each one of their lives, there are moments where they mess up royally. There are moments where they could look back and be like, I wish I could change that. And Abraham is no different. See, I could pick parts of his life and make Abram look like a standout guy, the best guy. But to do so would be to present a lie. Jesus was the only one that we could look at without flaw, sin, or mistake. Abram, on the other hand, made brilliant and courageous decisions, one of which we looked at last week. He made those before and after he made bad ones. And we're going to look at this morning two instances where Abraham possibly could have looked back, hopefully would have looked back and said, I wish I had done things differently. We're going to read in Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 to 20. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife, Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. What have you done to me? He said. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way, and his wife and everything he had. And let's be honest here. We can read this and come away kind of scratching our heads a little bit. You can read this and be like, I'm a little confused. Why did Abram act the way he did? Why did Sarai act the way she did? Why did God act the way he did? Well, let's start off with looking at Abram's good choices. Well, he starts off traveling to Egypt. He decides, well, there's a famine in the land. I am going to take my family to a place where there is security of food. I'm going to take them to a place where they can be provided for, where I can be provided for. Now, that could be a good decision. Now, we don't know if Abram went to God. We don't know if he asked God for direction in that or asked God for provision in food. We don't exactly know. But it can be said that there is a bit of wisdom in going to a place where there is food when there's a famine on. So as a wise and caring man, hopefully, he takes his wife and his group to Egypt, a place with food. Now, we don't have I don't know if you've ever experienced a famine here. I have never experienced a famine in my life. The worst of it was when I'd go into the kitchen and the snacks that I wanted weren't there, and I'd tell my mom or tell Joanna or tell myself, I've got nothing to eat. There's nothing to eat here. And usually I'd get a reply of, well, there's carrots or celery or there. I've personally never experienced a famine. And so knowing that truly when there's no food, I mean, we'd be like, okay, I need to go out shopping. I need to grab some food. And Abram says, there's no food, I'm going to take my family to where there's food. It makes complete sense. And when they get close to their destination, Abram also makes a great choice. Genesis 12, verse 11, as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know that what a beautiful woman you are. Stop. Great choice. Men, it is good to randomly compliment your wife. That's a great choice. Call her up and just let her know she's beautiful. That's a great choice. Say, hey, you're doing a great job on what you're doing. Random compliments, that's a great choice, Abram. But he took this very good thing, and he changed this very good thing, and he made it, he just twisted it all around. He turned it into a horrible thing. If you are complimenting your wife or complimenting someone else, don't have an agenda attached to it. It ruins the compliment. And that's exactly what Abram did. We see that he's not trying to be nice. Instead, he has complete selfish motives. Genesis 12:13. When the Egyptians see you, Abram says to his wife, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. Abram says, hey, you're beautiful. So because of that, I want you to put yourself at risk. I want you to risk your body, your being, to save myself. He turns it around and he completely acts selfishly. And let's not make excuses. Let's not avoid the reality of the situation. What Abraham does is absolutely despicable. He tells his wife, essentially, that his life is more valuable than hers. He tells Sarai to be deceptive at her own expense to protect him based on perceived dangers. Now, you could say that, well, it wasn't technically a lie because, after all, Sarai was his half-sister, and that's true. And while that is very weird and not right today, it was a complete different situation way back then. And God, ever at work changing people into who He created them to be, would later declare that this type of marriage was not right going forward. Leviticus 18 verses 11 says, "Do not have sexual relations with the daughter of your father's wife. Born to your father, she is your sister." Now, Abram and Sarai lived before that and were following the patterns of the people around them. And you could try to make an argument that Abram was just telling it like it was. But the truth is, the heart of Abraham's words, the heart of his actions, were not focused on the truth. They were focused on deceit. Deceit that would put his sister in possible harm's way. Abraham's brave choice that we looked at last week, to give up control and to follow God out of his hometown, isn't so brave anymore. He's taking the controller right back to make sure he stays safe. He's a bit of a coward. And he shows a bit how much he has faith in God. Had he forgotten what God had said? Last week we read Genesis 12, verses 2 to 3. "I will make you into a great nation." This is God's promise to Abram. "And I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curse you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." If he truly believed that in that moment, could he not trust in God to look after him? Did he really have to lie? Did he really have to be worried about anyone wanting to kill him? You know what? We too are faced with those temptations. After saying, "Okay, God, I'm giving you the controller. I'm giving you the direction of my life," we can go through moments where it's like, "You know what? I'm going to take that right back. You know what? I'm going to do something because I don't know if I can trust your ways." We could take the controller right back because suddenly, you know what? I'd rather change it. There are moments of weakness, and they can be damaging not only to ourselves, but to those around us. And that's the terrible truth. Abram was promised something, and then by his actions, he brings about the exact opposite of what his purpose was. God had just said, "All peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Abram instead becomes a reverse blessing. No, he doesn't go back in time, but he does become a reverse blessing in the fact that to Sarai, his wife, he's not a blessing at all of a husband. In that moment, he's controlling, and he gets Sarai to make herself vulnerable. And she's taken into Pharaoh's harem, into Pharaoh's household. If Abram had told Sarai what God had said about him, I wonder if she was thinking, "What about me? Am I included in that?" Because this doesn't seem like a blessing. And then there's Pharaoh. This is long before Moses, long before Abram's descendants being forced into slavery. Abram walks in with his assumptions, and forgetting his role to be a blessing to all peoples, decides to hatch a plan to deceive people and Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's household pays the price. This would have been an excellent opportunity for Abram to walk into Egypt and to say, "God, I'm trusting you. Here are my fears. but I know you're going to take care of me. And even if faced with danger, could have revealed to people how real and how incredible his God was. Instead, he makes self-serving decisions that jeopardize God's plan and the people around him. He has become a curse to the people of the earth. And you would think that he learned his lesson. After this, he'd look back and be like, okay, God took care of me. And that he wouldn't think of doing this ever again. Right? Well, no. This bonehead that's supposed to be the father of faith does the exact same thing. After God speaks to him again and changes his name to Abraham, he replicates this evil action. Genesis 20, verses 1 to 18. Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar. And there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation?" Now Abimelech had not gone, Verse 5, "Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister,' and didn't she also say, 'He is my brother'? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all who belong to you will die." Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, "What have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done." And Abimelech asked Abraham, "What was your reason for doing this?" Abraham replied, "I said to myself, 'There is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had made me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother.' Then Abimelech brought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he returned Sarah, his wife, to him. Abimelech said, 'My land is before you. Live wherever you'd like.' To Sarah he said, 'I am giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated.' Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slave, so they could have children again. For the Lord had kept all the women in Abimelech's household from conceiving because of Abraham's wife, Sarah." You know what's ironic? The people that Abraham goes to and is meant to be a blessing to bring the voice of Yahweh, the voice of God to, those people act more godly than Abram does. They act more out of innocence than Abraham does. This is all backwards. This is absolutely backwards. And it's because Abraham decides that he is going to worry about himself. He shows that he has more trust in his own plan, in his own actions, than in what God's plan was. If God did truly mean what he said, and he had the power to make it happen, no Pharaoh, no king, no passerby, no robber, nobody could jeopardize that plan. Abraham treats his wife as expendable and manipulates her by redefining what love would do. Again, don't water this down. Abraham said in verse 13 of Genesis 20, "This is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother." He says, if you love me, this is what you will do. You will lie for me. He tries to justify it by saying that he's worried about other people, what other people will think, and that other people will think that he's expendable. He said, verse 11, "I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife." Abraham takes his concerns, his worries, and he projects his own flaws onto other people. He takes his flawed understanding and puts it onto other people. See, he takes the view that these people don't fear God. And so what does Abraham do in his actions? He doesn't fear God. And yet we see that they very much see the power of God and they act accordingly. Sometimes we can project our own flaws onto other people, and it causes tensions in relationships. We project our understanding onto what other people do or say instead of letting them speak for themselves. And we see here in this case, if Abraham would have allowed the Egyptians, allowed Abimelech to speak for themselves, he may have seen that their value of marriage was higher than his presuppositions. See, we see them say, we see Pharaoh say, "What have you done to me?" Abimelech says, you have made me do something that should not have been done. Abram has caused other people to endure consequences because of his actions. I wonder how much this would have changed if Abram had taken his heart's concern to God and said, "God, this is what I'm worried about." How much better would it have been for Abram, for Sarai, for Pharaoh, for Abimelech? Abraham seems so wrapped up in preserving his life that he is prepared to throw God's plan out the window. He's so ready to throw God's purpose for him and God's promises out the window. He decides he'll build a security net for himself. And while Abraham could have thought, well, I don't need Sarai or Sarah to be a part of that plan. Again, very selfish. We see later that God very much had Sarah involved in that promised plan. And Abram puts the whole thing in jeopardy. And he does it twice. While Abram was ready to risk God's plan, God wasn't ready to do so. While Abraham was ready to say, you know what, I want to make sure I'm safe, God says, no, my plan's still happening. In spite of Abraham's failures, God had a plan to accomplish. And it was bigger than Abram. A plan that was open for all people. And we see this in how God acts. And it can lead us trying to figure out what in the world's happening. Why is God acting the way he does? See, Abraham's not the one being punished. Why? He's the one that's committing the wrong. That's not fair. Abram's at fault. And you'd be entirely right in saying that. That he is at fault. Because God even says as much. Genesis 20 verse 6. God said to Abimelech in the dream, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I've kept you from sinning against me." He says, no, Abimelech's not in the wrong. You have acted with a clear conscience. Abram's at fault. Abram messed this all up. So why does God inflict pain on Pharaoh the first time and Abimelech and his household the second time? See, what God does in these instances, they're not undoable. While he could have punished Abram, he could have taken that moment and said, okay, Abram, time to reap the consequences. You don't get your wife back. See, God had a plan. His goal was to accomplish something greater. And so God used temporary ailments to bring focus to a situation that needed remedying. You can be sure that while Pharaoh and Abimelech and their households were no doubt very annoyed by Abram, they were thankful that God had prevented them from acting in a way that they saw as wrongful. And yet, in Abraham's inability to reveal God's blessing, God still maintained full ability to reveal himself and his power. See, God's plan was to invite Abraham into that plan. To say, I want you to be a blessing to all people. To show people what being in relationship to God looks like. And even when Abram decides not to, God has full capability of saying, well, I'm going to step in here. See, God's plan remains when we falter. He will always do what is best to ensure his plan remains intact. And the response, God tells Abimelech that Abraham needs to pray for him. He calls Abraham a prophet after he made this terrible mistake. Why? God, couldn't you have chosen someone else? Shouldn't you have chosen someone else? And as unsettling as that may be, it points to what Jesus offers us in his death and resurrection. What Jesus accomplished for us when we declare him as Lord cannot be undone by our action. We cannot go back, reverse back in time, and put Jesus back in the tomb. We cannot undo God's plan. Our Heavenly Father's plan accomplished in Jesus cannot be changed. whether we want to be a part of that is our choice. And herein lies the beauty of God's sovereignty and our free will. While we are able to mess up a lot in this world, and even to be reverse blessings, God's plan remains. His overall big picture plan remains. So what does that mean? Does that mean that Abraham's justified in doing what he did? Does that make his actions okay? No. Absolutely not. Jesus and his disciples were not dismissive of evil and its effects. They called out wrong. They pointed to the problems in this world. Jesus faced them head on. And he pointed to righteousness, pointed to what was right. They declared evil what it was. And so should we. See, what Abraham did was wrong. And yet God, in his grace, brought about an end result that Abraham was unworthy of. How much greater is it for us when we look to the cross, look to what Jesus did for us, even though we can look back and say, I wish I could reverse and change that. Even when we look back and see those times where we have been reverse blessings, we can look to what Jesus said and what Jesus did and who he was, and know that his grace is greater. What would have happened if Abraham had gone in and been a blessing in those situations instead of what he did? And that's what we need to look at going forward. Instead of going into situations and saying, I'm going to look after myself, what would happen if we went forward and said, I am going to be the blessing to others that God created me to be through what Jesus did for me? This week, as we're tempted to be selfishly reactive, may we bring that to Jesus. Bring that to the Holy Spirit who helps us to be a blessing to those who are getting on our nerves, who are just outright acting malicious towards us. Maybe to get to that point, we need to see God's abundant grace through the actions we have already committed. That though I cannot change what I have done, God has been at work changing me. See, God wants you to be a blessing, not a reverse blessing. God doesn't want you to go back and change. You can't do that. God wants you to look to his Son. Look to Jesus. The Father wants you to look to the Son. To receive the forgiveness, the grace you need to move forward and be a blessing from here on out. And in those moments where you falter, to turn back and say, God, I know your plan remains, and I'm going back to that. I'm going to invite the music team to come forward as we look to close in song. See, I can't go back and change how I acted for that photo. But I know right now that my grandmother and grandfather have much better things on their mind. Celebrating with what Jesus did for them. See, my grandmother, grandfather, they weren't perfect. Nobody in that photo you saw was perfect. And Abraham is a source of hope to us. In the fact that he wasn't perfect, but God was and remained perfect. See, the true source of hope is God. And if Abraham had given control, full control to God, how much more could we have seen people recognize the graciousness of God? But God's plan still remained. He wasn't about to let Abraham throw it out. So how can we be a part of revealing God's plan, God's desires, God's love? How can we be a part of revealing who Jesus is to those around us? He'll see his plan through. And if you give him your life, he'll see his plan through in your life as you trust in him, and you'll be eternally grateful. Let's sing together.